to go ahead and introduce Richard MacMaster. Take it away.
This is going to be dealing with British writers who visited the United States in the era of Andrew Jackson. And as you see, they were visiting Cousin Jonathan. A later generation would say they were visiting Uncle Sam, but it was universal in that first part of the 19th century to think of the Americans as Cousin Jonathans because of the common English ancestry, or at least English culture. And that meant, as we've seen, that Americans had a kind of love-hate relationship with the British. And these writers, who were numerous, we've just picked three, these writers were almost without exception seen as hostile critics and excoriated in the American press as being terrible people. Let's go now for the next, for the first one. All right, Captain Basil Hall, a Scottish naval officer who had been all over the world in various government posts. He had been in Latin America, he had been in Africa, he had been in the Far East, and in 1828, he decided to come to America. And he published his travels in America in 1829. He was regarded by, excuse me, by the American press as a very hostile critic, and consequently, his books sold. Excuse me, I'm having a little trouble here today. His books sold because a very bad review is better than no review at all. And Americans wanted to know what terrible things this man had said. Next. Mrs. Francis Trollope came to America in 1828 to set up an import business in Cincinnati. The Trollopes were kind of distressed middle-class folk in the British understanding of middle class. Her husband was chronically ill and had been unable to keep his business going. So they decided that they would start anew in America. Her husband followed later. She came with some of the children, and he brought the rest of the children. And she had some positive feelings about her time in America. And here there's a quote about during nearly 2 years that I resided in Cincinnati, I neither saw a beggar nor a man of sufficient fortune to permit his ceasing his efforts to increase it. So everybody was working in America. Everybody was serious about what they could do next. This is Cincinnati at that time. She did not care for the filth in the streets or the hogs that were let loose to take care of it in Cincinnati and in most other American cities. She found an awful lot about American life that she did not like. She had come in New Orleans, found New Orleans oppressive, partly because of the presence of so many slaves. And she moved up to Natchez, where her friend Frances Wright, Fanny Wright, had set up a colony to educate Black children, and almost anything that Fanny Wright touched never worked. So she was greatly disappointed in that. It didn't seem to be worth the game wasn't worth the candle. So she continued then, which is where she intended to go, to continued on to Cincinnati, and she lived there for just about 2 years. Next. The business failed, and Mrs. Trollope and the children moved. Mr. Trollope had died. They visited Washington, Baltimore, and Philadelphia, and she writes about these cities. She also stayed at Potomac in Maryland, where another friend of hers was living. And I wanted to read a passage of her experience when she was in Washington. We were at Washington at the time that the measure for chasing the last of several tribes of Indians from their forest homes was canvassed in Congress and finally decided upon by the fiat of the president, Andrew Jackson. If the American character may be judged by their conduct in this matter, they are most lamentably deficient in every feeling of honor and integrity. It is among themselves and from themselves that I have heard the statements which represent them as treacherous and false, almost beyond belief, in their intercourse with the unhappy Indians. And she quotes from a number of American papers making that point. Had I, during my residence in the United States, observed any single feature in their national character that could justify their eternal boast of liberality and the love of freedom, I might have respected them, however much my taste might have been offended by what was peculiar in their manners and customs. But it is impossible for any mind of common honesty not to be revolted by the contradictions in their principles and practice. They inveigh against the governments of Europe because, as they say, they favor the powerful and oppress the weak. You may hear this declaimed upon in Congress, roared out in taverns, discussed in every drawing room, satirized upon the stage, nay, even anathematized from the pulpit. Listen to it and then look at them at home. You will see them with one hand hoisting the cap of liberty and with the other flogging their slaves. You will see them 1 hour lecturing their mob on the indefeasible rights of man, and the next driving from their homes the children of the soil whom they have bound themselves to protect by the most solemn treaties. Next. This is, of course, the removal of all of the Indians at that time in 1830. She returned to England in 1831 and published Domestic Manners of the Americans. And quite rightly said, I suspect that what I have written will make it evident that I do not like America. Why is it that neither its beauty nor its abundance can suffice to neutralize or soften the distaste which the aggregate of my recollections has left on my mind? So next, she was not a very popular writer in America, but she did sell because everybody wanted to know what she said. This book made her a celebrity, and she followed it with a well-received novel the refugee in America. Now a widow, she supported her family by writing novels, several of them situated in America. And as you know, her son, Anthony Trollope, who had traveled along with her in this American adventure, was then in the next generation a prolific and highly regarded novelist in his own right. And he's the Trollope, of course, that we know as one of the important 19th century British writers. Next. This is Captain Marryat. Frederick Marryat rose from midshipman to captain in the Royal Navy during the Napoleonic Wars. Retiring on half pay in 1830, he had been, again, served in a great many parts of the world. He turned to a literary career, editing a monthly magazine and writing novels about life in the Navy. He was the C.S. Forester or Patrick O'Brien of his day. And he had a number of books that are still, well, they were when I was a kid, were still readable for younger readers. There's a lot of adventure on shipboard. Next. He arrived in New York at the height of the Panic of 1837, and he analyzes what was going on and put it down to, quite accurately, the ready extension of credit that obviously the American economy, as like most economies, depended to some degree on the availability of credit, but the end of the bank war and the removal of the federal money from the Bank of the United States and parceling it out in dribs and drabs to what were considered sound banks, that is, Democratic Party controlled banks all over the country, gave the notion that there was just unlimited credit. The banks were quick to make loans for this, that, and the other thing. And this created a wave of speculation. And Marryat talks about this, a number of other writers do, where lots in towns that were no more than a number of building lots laid out on a series of fields were going being turned over day by day at higher and higher prices. And somehow or other, the bubble had to burst. And it did early in 1837. If you notice, this is a picture of a man who is bankrupt. The children are complaining about what's happened. The wife is unhappy, and there's a creditor at the door. And you'll notice in the background, the two portraits are Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren, whom the creditor, whom the cartoonist obviously blames for the whole situation. Well, then Marryat traveled throughout the United States and Canada, and he wrote, unlike Mrs. Trollope, who was simply critical of what people ate and the addiction to chewing tobacco and spitting and all sorts of other things like that. He never took any interest in that. In fact, he says He's not going to tell you what people eat or anything like that. It's an extended travelogue. But the book opens with an absolutely magnificent chapter where the ship is about to leave Portsmouth in England, and with nothing but direct dialogue, he sets the whole picture, and it's a wonderful piece of writing. Well, this is then, unlike other British travelers, he was generally positive, if amused at Yankee traits. If he mentioned something, he wasn't really critical. Uh, and he has this neat little statement: America is a wonderful country. The mind can hardly calculate upon the destined perfection and power which it may, in the course of 2 centuries, arrive. So he was predicting a bright future, but it might take until the 21st century for it to reach full fruition. Well, next. This is an odd picture that went with a book that he did about, and it's actually a cartoon about his travels in Africa. He was outraged in America by discrimination against free Negroes and denying them the vote. And you can see that singular is the degree in contempt of the degree of contempt and dislike that for the free blacks are held in the free states of America. We're talking about the North, where they are deprived of their rights as citizens. In fact, in the United States, a Negro, from his color, and I believe his color alone, is a degraded being. Isn't this extraordinary in a land that professes universal liberty, equality, and the rights of man? So, like most British visitors, he found that difficult. Okay, next. Now we come to Charles Dickens, and who needs no introduction, I'm sure. We know him as a very prolific and a very prolific in his language, in his characters, in his convoluted plots. He visited the United States for the first time in 1842. He was a bit younger than in this portrait. He was a celebrity in his 20s, and he was just 30 in 1842 when he came to America. He published his American Notes for general circulation the same year. And 2 weeks from today, Paul Ortiz will tell you what is in his American Notes and how his travels colored his understanding of American society. Next. All right. 2 years later, it took him 2 years to complete this, Dickens published Martin Chuzzlewit. Like all Dickens novels, Martin Chuzzlewit is an incredibly complex, very long novel with plots and subplots and an absolute plethora of characters. But one of the threads that runs through the book is that Martin Chuzzlewit, who is the central figure, is turned out by Mr. Pecksniff and thus deprived of the society of the young lady that he will eventually marry Susan. And without other prospects, he and his servant, Mark Tapley, travel to America, landing in New York, to set themselves up as a firm of architects. Mark is a servant, but he becomes and company. So it's Chuzzlewit and company. They are business partners. And of the two, it's something like Bertie Wooster and Jeeves. Mark is much sharper and much more perceptive. And Martin is he can be taken in by almost anything. So that's going to be a significant part of the plot. They have not left the ship before they discover the power of America's press. I'm going to be reading quite a lot here, if you can put up with my reading. The newsboy, as in this picture, is shouting, "Here's this morning's New York sewer," cried one. "Here's this morning's New York stabber. Here's the New York family spy. Here's the New York private listener. Here's the New York peeper. Here's the New York plunderer. Here's the New York keyhole reporter. Here's the New York rowdy journal. Here's all the New York papers. Here's full particulars of the patriotic Loco Foco," that was Democratic, "movement yesterday, in which the Whigs was so chawed up, and the last Alabama gouging case, and the interesting Arkansas duel with Bowie knives, and all the political, commercial, and fashionable news. Here they are, here they are, here's the papers, here's the papers. Here's the sewer," cried another. "Here's the New York sewer. Here's some of the 12,000 of today's sewer, with the best accounts of the markets and all the shipping news, and 4 whole columns of country correspondence, and a full account of the ball at Mrs. White's last night, where all the beauty and fashion of New York was assembled, with the sewer's own particulars of the private lives of all the ladies that was there." And that is probably more than any newsboy could have shouted, whether on shipboard or not. But it suggests that the American press was everywhere, and that it included an awful lot of the gutter press. Well, next. Martin very quickly is taken up by the gentleman on the left, Colonel Diver, the editor of the Rowdy Journal, and taken to the office of the Rowdy Journal. This is one of the pictures for the original book that was drawn by a man named Hablet Knight Brown. And Mr. Brown was better known as Fizz. And he illustrated all of Dickens's books, and in the original form when they appeared in magazines, he was the illustrator for every one of them from Pickwick on. So here we are at the Rowdy Journal. Hey, did I miss where I was here? I did. Excuse me. Oh. Yeah, here we go. The man in the center is introduced by Colonel Diver as my war correspondent, sir, Mr. Jefferson Brick. Martin could not help starting at this unexpected announcement. Mr. Brick seemed pleased with the sensation he produced upon the stranger and shook hands with him with an air of patronage designed to reassure him and to let him know there was no occasion to be frightened, for he, Brick, wouldn't hurt him. You have heard of Jefferson Brick, I see, sir, quoth the colonel with a smile. England has heard of Jefferson Brick. Europe has heard of Jefferson Brick. Let me see, when did you leave England, sir? 5 weeks ago, said Mark. 5 weeks ago, repeated the colonel thoughtfully, as he took his seat upon the table and swung his legs. Now let me ask you, sir, which of Mr. Brick's articles had become at that time the most obnoxious to the British Parliament and the Court of St. James? Upon my word, said Martin, I have reason to know, sir, interrupted the colonel, that the aristocratic circles of your country quail before the name of Jefferson Brick. I should like to be informed, sir, from your lips, which of his sentiments has struck the deadliest blow. And Brick himself then says, at the 100 heads of the hira of corruption, now groveling in the dust beneath the lance of reason, and spouting up to the universal and above us, arch above us, in sanguinary gore, said Mr. Brick, quoting his own last article. The libation of freedom, Brick, hinted the colonel. Must sometimes be quaffed in blood, colonel, cried Brick. And when he said blood, he gave the great pair of scissors a sharp snap, as if they said blood too, and were quite of his opinion. This done, they both looked at Martin, pausing for a reply. Next. Now, Martin is given by a man who makes his acquaintance, a Mr. Bevan from Massachusetts, an introduction to a General Choke. And General Choke will help him in making the decision whether to settle in the Valley of Eden in the West. And so Martin and Mark begin a trip to view the land of Eden. They're on a railroad train, and they are evidently, Dickens doesn't tell you where anything is apart from New York, but they are traveling on what was known as the Pennsylvania Main Line of Improvements. The Pennsylvania Turnpike was laid out more or less on the line of the main line of improvements that had been completed by 1842. So they're riding on the Pennsylvania Railroad, and they are greeted by a fellow passenger who asks them, how is the old country? Progressing backwards, I expect, as usual. Well, how's Queen Victoria? In good health, I believe, said Martin. Queen Victoria won't shake in her royal shoes at all when she hears tomorrow named, observed the stranger. Oh, no. Not that I'm aware of. Why should she? She won't be taken with a cold chill when she realizes what is being done in these diggings, said the stranger. No, no, said Martin. I think I could take my oath on that. The strange gentleman looked at him as if in pity for his ignorance or prejudice and said, "Well, sir, I tell you this, there ain't an engine with its biler bust in God Almighty's free United States, so fixed and nipped and frizzled in a most eternal smash as that young critter in her luxurious location in the Tower of London will be when she reads the next double extra water toast Gazette." And it turns out that this gentleman, whose name is Lafayette Kettle, is the editor of this paper, and that traveling with him is General Choke, the man whom Martin has a letter of introduction to. So, "Upon my word," cried Martin, laughing, "since you do me the honor to consider me his representative, I have only to say I never heard of Queen Victoria reading the What's-His-Name Gazette, and that I should scarcely think it's probable." General Choke smiled upon the rest and said, in patient and benign explanation, "It is sent to her, sir. It is sent to her per mail. But if it's addressed to the Tower of London, it would hardly come to hand, I fear," returned Martin, "for she don't live there." Well, from there, he continues with General Choke, and General Choke introduces him to the Eden Land Company. He takes them to the office. It was a small place, something like a turnpike, but a great deal of land maybe got into a dice box, so why not a whole territory be bargained for in a shed? It was but a temporary office, too, for the Edeners were going to build a superb establishment for the transaction of their business, and had already got so far as to mark out the site. And General Choke introduces Mark and Martin to Mr. Scatter. He says that "I have two gentlemen on business, Mr. Scatter." He shook hands with each of them. Nothing is done in America without shaking hands. "I think I know what business you have brought these strangers here upon, then, General." "Well, sir, I expect you may." "Mr. Scatter," said the general, assuming his oratorical deportment, "sir, here is my hand and here is my heart. I esteem you, sir, and I ask your pardon. These gentlemen are friends of mine, or I would not have brought them here. Sir, being well aware, sir, that the lots at present go entirely too cheap, but these are friends, sir. These are particular friends." Mr. Scatter was so satisfied by this explanation that he shook the general warmly by the hand and got out of his rocking chair to do it. He then invited the general's particular friends to accompany him into the office. "Heyday!" cried Martin, as his eye rested on a great plan which occupied one whole side of the office. Indeed, the office had little else in it. "That's Eden," said Scatter, picking his teeth. "Why, I had no idea it was a city." "Hadn't you? Oh, it's a city. A flourishing city, too, an architectural city. There were banks, churches, cathedrals, marketplaces, factories, hotels, stores, mansions, whatever, an exchange, a theater, public buildings of all kinds, down to the office of the Eden Stinger, a daily journal, all faithfully depicted in the view before them. Dear me, it's really a most important place, cried Martin. Oh, it's very important, observed the agent. But I'm afraid, said Martin, glancing again at the public buildings, that there's nothing left for me to do. Well, it ain't all built, replied the agent. Not quite. This was a great relief. The marketplace now, said Martin. Is that built? That, said the agent. Let me see. No, that ain't built. Rather a good job to begin with, eh, Mark? Whispered Martin, nudging him with his elbow. So they move to the decision that they will buy property in Eden. And here the general interposed and called out to Scatter from the doorway to give his friends the particulars of that little lot of 50 acres with the house upon it, which, having belonged to the company formerly, had lately lapsed again into their hands. You are a deal too open-handed, General, was the answer. It is a lot that should be rose in price, it is. But they decided to sell this property. So Mark and Martin are now landowners in Eden, and they travel to Eden on a steamboat. Presumably, they are setting out down the Ohio River from Pittsburgh, and we don't know exactly where they're going, but it's been calculated by somebody or other that Eden is located at Cairo, Illinois, where the Ohio joins the Mississippi. And they travel along and eventually get there, and they will discover that the property that they have bought is underwater, that at last they're on the ship and they're getting on the steamboat. They stopped. The waters of the deluge might have left it but a week before, so choked with slime and matted growth was the hideous swamp which bore the name of Eden. There being no depth of water close inshore, they landed from the vessel's boat with all their goods beside them. There were a few log houses visible among the dark trees. The best, a cowshed with a rude stable. But for the wharves, the marketplace, the public buildings, there was nothing there. And they will stay there for a while and then finally have an opportunity to abandon the Garden of Eden. And there's one other passage I wanted to share. I'm having trouble finding it. Oh. Darn. It's one of the best that they go to. Oh. Oh, here it is. All right. They go to the meeting of the Water Toast Association of United Sympathizers. And what Dickens is satirizing here is the network of organizations that spread all over the United States in 1840-41 in sympathy with Daniel O'Connell and his efforts to get the repeal of the Union and home rule for Ireland. They found him as a great exemplar of equality and liberty and so on. So the Water Toast Association of Sympathizers is prepared to raise money for what O'Connell called the repeal rent. And these little organizations were raising sums of money from Irish immigrants and from others across the United States in the very early 1840s. And it's this little bit here. It happened that just as the general began to read this letter addressed to O'Connell in the highest terms of praise, the railroad train arrived bringing a new mail from England, and a packet had been handed in to the secretary, which during its perusal and the frequent cheerings in homage to freedom he had opened. Now its contents disturbed him very much, and the moment the general sat down, he hurried to his side and placed in his hand a letter and several printed extracts from English newspapers, to which, in a state of infinite excitement, he called his immediate attention. The general, being greatly heated by his own composition, was in a fit state to receive any inflammable influence, but he had no sooner possessed himself of the contents of these documents than a change came over his face, involving such a huge amount of choler and passion that the noisy concourse were silent in a moment, in very wonder at the sight of him. "My friends," cried General Choke, "my friends and fellow citizens, we have been mistaken in this man." "In what man?" was the cry. "In this," panted the general, holding up the letter he had read aloud a few minutes before. "I find that he has been and is the advocate, consistent in it always too, of nigger emancipation. If anything beneath the sky be real, those sons of freedom would have pistol stabbed that man by coward hands and murderous violence if he had stood among them at that time." They tore the letter, cast the fragments in the air, trod down the pieces as they fell, and yelled and groaned and hissed all they could until they could cry no longer. "I shall move," said the general, when he could make himself heard, "that the Water Toast Association of United Sympathizers be immediately dissolved." "But, my fellow countrymen," said the general, "the contributions. We have funds. What is to be done with the funds?" It was hastily resolved that a piece of plate should be presented to a certain constitutional judge who had laid down from the bench the noble principle that it was lawful for any white mob to murder any black man, and that another piece of plate of similar value should be presented to a certain patriot who had declared from his high place in the legislature that he and his friends would hang without trial any abolitionist who might pay them a visit. So that was the end of the Water Toast Association. And in fact, it was the total breakdown of Daniel O'Connell's effort to recruit the Irish in America for abolition. Well, eventually, Martin and Mark, chastened and saved actually by a generous gift from Mr. Bevan, are able to return home to England. And as they are leaving, this is their final thought on America. Why, I was thinking, sir, returned Mark, that if I was a painter and was called upon to paint the American eagle, how should I do it? Oh, paint it like an eagle as you could, I suppose, said Martin. No, said Mark, that wouldn't do for me, sir. I should want to draw it like a bat for its short-sightedness, like a bantam for its bragging, like a magpie for its honesty, like a peacock for its vanity, like an ostrich for its putting its head in the mud and thinking nobody sees it. And Martin adds, and like a phoenix for its power of springing from the ashes of its faults and vices and soaring up anew into the sky. Well, Mark, let us hope so. And that was the end of their American adventure. And it's also the end of our adventure with Charles Dickens. Next week, as you know, Paul Ortiz will be talking about Great Expectations, and 2 weeks about Dickens' American Journal. Do we have any comments or questions?
Richard, I'd just like to say, I think probably on behalf of all of us, we're just so pleased at how you make history live for us. It's just been a marvelous experience, and we can't wait to see you either in person or on the screen with some more of these kinds of tales. It's just been wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ron. And you've been great in all of this.
Amen.
Any questions here on Zoom or anyone here in the Oak Room? Any questions here in the Oak Room? I think you've left us speechless, Richard. Well, thank you everyone for being with us again, and hopefully Richard will be with us next week and we can hear his questions for Paul.
Thank you all.
Appreciate all your work, Richard. Everyone stay well, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, thank you.